Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Kenyon College Profcast. I'm Celso M. Villegas, National Endowment for the Humanities, Distinguished Teaching Associate Professor of Sociology. One of the best things about being a professor at Kenyon College are the conversations we have with our colleagues and our students about being teacher-scholars and all of us being lifelong learners. We may be in Little Gambier, Ohio, but interesting and important writers, scientists, and artists from around the world come to see us, and I want to have conversations with them in the Kenyon way about teaching and learning in the company of friends. My guest today is Jeffrey C. Alexander, Lillian Saden Chavenson Emeritus Professor of Sociology at Yale University and Director Emeritus of Yale's Center for Cultural Sociology. Professor Alexander has advocated for a sociology that puts culture first and puts us in conversation with the humanities. In recent years, he's elaborated on his theory of the civil sphere with two new books published by Polity Press, Civil Repair and Frontlash Backlash. With Galen Watts of the University of Waterloo, I'm co-editing a Festschrift, a collection of essays in honor of Professor Alexander's career, titled The Cultural Sociological Imagination, coming next year with Palgrave. Welcome back to Kenyon, Jeff. You came to give a talk here 12 years ago, if you think about it. It must have been a nice visit for you to come back.
Well, it's a beautiful place, so and very good students and excellent faculty. and I love that middle walk, whatever it's called.
Middle path. Yeah.
Middle path.
Yeah.
Especially when I came the first time in the fall.
Yeah. All the leaves falling and all that sorts of stuff. I remember we had one of our first conversations. I was teaching your book, The Civil Sphere.
That's where we met.
That's where we met. And you asked to see the syllabus of the book. I'd never taught it before. And as we were walking down Middle Path, you said, you better have assigned chapter 8. And I don't even remember if I did. And you were flipping through it. I was absolutely mortified as we were going to the talk. And you said, nice selection. And you handed the syllabus back to me. And luckily, chapter 8 was on there. So it worked out.
Well, we've been working together almost ever since.
Yeah. It's been more than a decade, which has been a long time. And I appreciated you coming here. Changed my life in lots of ways, too.
I'm happy. I'm happy to be in association with you, Celso.
Oh, great. We've got to know each other pretty well over the years, and I want to talk a little bit about how you got to be where you are, thinking about you as a lifelong learner and as a teacher, which is typically not the angle that people take when they think about you. But there's lots of stuff in your life that help us understand cultural sociology that way. So you were born in Wisconsin, and then you moved to LA in middle school, and you went to high school at University High School in West LA. And this is the mid 60s. So what was high school like for you?
Well, actually, high school was 62 to 65.
Okay.
I mean, it was a 3-year. I went to a year of high school in Milwaukee.
Okay.
So it was just the beginning of the 60s. I mean, I remember I went to a Beatles concert at Dodger Stadium in the summer of 64 with a few of my friends, and I was very disconcerted. The first time I heard about the Beatles was it was in just a few months after I moved there, and I was sitting on top of a car outside my apartment, and I remember these girls came by and said they were singing Beatles songs, and I said, "Who are the Beatles?" You haven't heard of the Beatles? And then I think my brother and I went to a concert, and the thing that it was very disappointing because the girls were screaming so loud that it was impossible to hear any music.
Oh.
It was quite a group phenomenon.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
You went to high school around the time when California surfer culture and car culture were important. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it seemed like kind of Grease, the movie. It was a pretty innocent time. I mean, Martin Luther King, my parents were very liberal, so they were, especially my mother was involved in social volunteerism, social work, very big social conscience. So we closely followed the civil rights movement in its heyday. It was very exciting. The Vietnam War, though, was just starting. And so I wasn't an activist in high school. I was just involved in vicarious interest in politics.
Yeah. You mentioned to me, I think, that you used to go with your mom to do some work in Watts when she was volunteering.
I did go with her, visiting some places with her. And later in college, I had a job where I worked in Watts the whole summer as part of the Lyndon Johnson's poverty program, and that experience was a tremendous eye-opening experience to see it changed from just being, a very run-down place to meeting a lot of young people my age and older, realize how they had so little to do in the summers. They had, there were no parks, there was no recreation. I actually was supposed to coordinate the recreation at these 3 different community centers. So we would, play ping pong, pool, different things. It was quite an experience.
Yeah. You were, we'll talk about your high school time. You played tennis in high school. We were on the tennis team. And you also were very motivated academically. And you had a favorite teacher, Mr. Holtby, Mr. Fred Holtby. Can you tell us about him?
Right. Well, I played 4 years of tackle football in grade school and then the beginning of high school. And then I decided that it was too painful and I would stop. So tennis became my only sport.
Okay.
But I played a lot of tennis. And I wasn't intellectual at all. Just liked school, liked studying. It was relatively easy. But we did have one teacher, an English teacher for the maybe advanced English group, who was a very unusual person. He was kind of a beatnik, I would say, and he had, he didn't care about being, nice to you or having people like him, but he did develop a cult, I would say. And he had giant blown up photographs of the new critics, like Kenneth Burke and William Epson and others on the wall. And he taught a way of interpretation, a formal approach to literature that was highly unusual and very sophisticated. So he taught me. That was my first interest in analyzing literature. I remember an assignment. We were supposed to write on War and Peace, and the paper I wrote was on the bridges. And this formal criticism was a very decontextualizing. I'm sure Kenyon had a lot of new critics.
Oh, yeah. We're the home of the new critics back then, yeah.
And so I just took the bridges, all the passages that had bridges, took them, decontextualized them, and tried to figure out what the symbolism was doing in the book. So that was my first experience with what I later would call the relative autonomy of symbols.
Oh, interesting. Okay. What did Mr. Holtby think of the paper? Do you remember?
He liked it. He was, he'd never let on too much, but he liked it. And then I think it was because of Holtby and also my, I read a lot of novels and that I decided I would be a writer.
Yeah.
And I would be a fiction writer. That was my idea. And so I wrote, in the summers, my father, while he was, I suppose we were upper middle class, my father was an advertising executive, but he was of the old school and he insisted that I work. on Saturdays, over the summers. He wouldn't buy me anything. So I had, like, if I wanted a camera, okay, that was good. So I had a paper route after school. And in one summer, I think, is the summer of '64, I got a job at the Los Angeles Country Club, which was an elite, very upper-class club, which did not allow Jews, much less non-white people, to be members. So my father would joke that I was the only Jew in the country club. But one of the experiences I had that really made a deep impression on me was meeting, for the first time in my life, many African Americans, who they mostly were the waiters and the other bus boys. I was a bus boy, and the dishwashers. And one of the older men was very inspiring to me. I remember him saying, why are we called Negroes? Why aren't we African Americans? Which nobody used the term. It was many, many years before. And so I got to know him, and I wrote a short story about him. And I sent it into the New Yorker, which was a regular magazine around our house, and I was disappointed that they didn't publish it. But of course, I'm not surprised. But I did get a handwritten note from the editor saying that, this is interesting. Of course, I told him I'm 17, so keep it up. And it was a big moment.
Yeah, so you were inspired to you wanted to be a fiction writer. You read a lot of Saul Bellow, is your favorite author you mentioned before. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was in the 60s that American Jewish writers became very important. Philip Roth and Bellow especially, and then also John Updike, who was kind of a colleague of theirs. Bellow was always been one of my absolute favorites, and I feel he's a really sarcastic, sardonic observer of American life. He became more conservative later. By the time I was reading him in graduate school, he was in his relatively grumpy conservative phase.
You ended up going from LA to Harvard for college, and we talked a little bit about how it was a challenging transition for you, right? Why was that?
Well, I went to a very, very large public high school. We had 3 grades, 3,000 students. In my class, which was, 7, 8, 900 people, we had 3 people go to Harvard. And when I got to Harvard, it was like being on Mars. Harvard was just coming out of being kind of an aristocratic place for the sons of the elite. It had only begun to admit Jews beyond a quota of probably 5%. I also, by then, was very identified with Californian beach, surfer culture. Harvard was very uptight, very serious, and very conservative, buttoned-up place. Everybody, you had to wear a sport coat and a tie in the dining hall. And when I came to Harvard, I was very interested in politics. I'd worked for a few politicians on their campaigns. One man who was running for city council, another person who was running for Secretary of State in California, who had been the Solicitor General under Kennedy. And I wanted to go back to Los Angeles and be a politician and become a reformist mayor of LA. But Harvard, the shocking thing is they actually had very difficult classes. And I realized I'm actually going to have to study here and learn a lot of other things. I'm not just going to be going to law school in 4 years. And it was great because, I mean, the first year, it was still the age of what they called GE requirements, general education. And we had this wonderful year-long course. It started with the Iliad and ended with Waiting for Godot. And it was taught by great lecturers, and I think that that had a big effect on me in making me realize, you know, there was civilization, there were works of art, I started reading political theory, and I became less directly focused on going into politics and more on learning things.
Yeah. Some of your teachers were Michael Walzer, the philosopher, Barrington Moore, the sociologist, and they taught in, I think it was the social studies program at Harvard.
There was a wonderful interdisciplinary major called social studies that you applied to at the end of your freshman year, and you felt very fortunate. If you got in, they interviewed you. Everything was taken very seriously at Harvard, and then there were 3 different specialties, and my specialty that I chose inside of that was something like urban affairs or something. But I mean, the thing that went through my years at Harvard was politics. That was what changed. I mean, there was kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There was a cultural revolution of rock and roll music, and the whole anti-establishment way of life. Kind of, I wouldn't say nihilism, but I'd say expressivism.
Yeah.
Let's say that went along with that I was very, very caught up in, and it was a pretty exciting. Thing. He dressed up in bell bottoms and wore flowered T-shirts. You were stoned a lot, and you were listening to music. And it was kind of like a revolution.
And so on that point, so you started in social studies your sophomore year, and then you came home to LA for the summer, and you started working in the copy at the LA Times as a copy boy.
Yes, I think that was after my freshman. I think it was after my freshman year.
Okay.
I'm not. I think it was, because if you wanted to be a journalist, which I did, I'd already joined the Crimson, which was a really wonderful newspaper. Certainly, I hope I don't get into trouble here, but I'm sure it was the best college newspaper, and it would send people, right into the New York Times, the Washington Post. It was Wall Street Journal. In fact, in my junior year summer, I had something called a Wall Street Journal newspaper scholarship, which allowed me to work on the Detroit Free Press and the Miami Herald. But after my first year, I was a copy boy, which was a do-nothing position, but an honorable do-nothing position that it gave you a sense of the inside of a newsroom and what a newspaper was. I think the most responsible job I had was tearing off the weather from the ticker tape machine and writing it up on a little box. But then at some point, because I was very interested in rock and roll music, I walked into the Charles Champlin's office. He was the entertainment editor of the LA Times. I didn't know him, but I just walked in and said, you never review rock and roll groups who come here. You just do like Frank Sinatra and pop groups. And he said, yeah, that's true. I said, well, I want to do it. I said, you should do it. He said, okay. And I said, and I would like to be the reviewer. And he, as it turned out, he'd gone to Harvard. He was in the same house, Lowell House, that I was going into. So he was willing to give me a chance. I mean, he would look at my copy. He wasn't directly my editor. I had another, lower level. But it was a fantastic experience because I got my press card. And so during the week, I would call up the most famous place in LA, Whiskey A Go-Go, on Sunset Strip, and say, the Doors are coming. I'm going to come on Friday night to listen, and I'd like you to arrange, I'd like to interview them on Saturday morning. And so, it was quite an opportunity, so I could do that week after week. And I met many people who became legendary.
Yeah.
And I also wrote articles. I would usually expand these articles in the fall for the Crimson longer. But it was exciting because I came into contact with these kind of heroes, these gurus, and people who were completely out of their minds. I mean, they were at the margin or at the edge of the cultural revolution.
Yeah,
and I was pretty straight, but
Yeah, you're very. I've gotten to read some of these articles, and you've come across as very serious.
Yeah,
talking to the Doors and Buffalo Springfield, Jefferson Airplane you interviewed too, and
Smokey Robinson. Yeah, I love the Jefferson Airplane, and I had a girlfriend in Berkeley, so we would also go to the Fillmore. That summer, the next year.
Can we talk about your interview with the Doors, because that's actually quite wild, and you can see part of that in the LA Times, and then a longer version of that in the Harvard Crimson. But you showed up Sunday morning after seeing them perform, and you see everybody else in the Doors, Ray Manzarek, and Jim Morrison's late, and he shows up. He's kind of larger than life figure, and he's totally hungover.
Yeah. I mean, these guys, the last thing that they wanted to do was meet, a 19-year-old kid to be interviewed on Sunday morning, probably up all night, having fun. Mm-hmm. And I would ask them, I was trying to get them to say things that would be interesting. And I remember with Morrison, who was, important, but he hadn't yet become a myth. You'll see. I asked him about drugs and stuff, and they would say, "Oh, what drugs?" And, but basically, I said, how do you see this thing you're doing? What thing you did last night? Because clearly, it was great music, and so he said. He kind of woke up then. He said, well, it's not music. It's not really music, he said. I said, well, what is it, He said, well, it's drama.
Oh.
And I said, I don't quite get what you mean. He said, well, Greek drama, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, I've read about it, but he said, well, I'm a drama major. He went to UCLA. I don't think he stayed enrolled. And he said, in Greece, the theater was very multidimensional, and it had larger-than-life performers, and it had music, and it had ritual. And what we're doing, my aim here in what we do is to create a kind of performance, a ritual experience, something larger than life. And I was absolutely fascinated that he was so thoughtful and had such a unusual understanding of what he was doing.
Yeah. He says something like, as you try to remember it in your article, that the Greeks had an audience, and then someone steps out and puts on a mask, and they become the first actor. And it's this wild, almost stream of consciousness description of a Greek play, which is absolutely fascinating to see.
And that's exactly what I used like 30 or 40 years later when I developed my theory of cultural pragmatics and social performance.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think that interview stuck in your mind for so long, and you're able to eventually articulate a theory about why people wish to be understood, and they do it in a dramatic way, in a performative way.
I think that I remembered what Jim Morrison said. We're not just singing, we're performing. Mm-hmm. And that it was he wanted something larger than life to be a kind of happening. So I think that stayed with me. I think that actually affected my later work.
That's fascinating. It's a story that if you read your article, it seems like you just came up with that on your own, I guess. I mean, you did, but Jim Morrison was there maybe speaking to you from the past.
I should have put that as the epigraph to the article.
That's fascinating. So you went you graduated from Harvard in 1969, and you were an active member of the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society. You read a lot of Marxist philosophy with your friends there, and you were an activist. And then you headed to UC Berkeley for graduate school, and you wanted to be a Marxist intellectual, tracking that. But you had some really powerful experiences with your advisors there, Leo Lowenthal, Neil Smeltzer, and Robert Bellah.
Yeah.
And Bellah said that you should read Talcott Parsons' Structure of Social Action. Mm. And you read that, and you wrote, I think you told me it was like a 80-page or 100-page paper. And it was late.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you told Bellah, I mean, how did that conversation go? You said, I'm going to turn this paper in late. And,
yeah. Okay. You're compressing a great deal of history, which is fine. We only have an hour, but, at the end of the last year of my Harvard undergraduate, we had a New Left study group, Michael Kazin and others, and we read social theory to try to understand, the world which was overwhelming us at the time. And then I only wanted to go to graduate school in Berkeley because of its leftism. The faculty wasn't leftist, but the environment was. And so I got associated when I first went there with this group called the Socialist Revolution, which was the name of they were both a group of wonderful people and a journal.
Mm-hmm. Eli Zaretsky was the...
Eli Zaretsky, Jimmy Weinstein. James Weinstein was a Marxist historian. Mm-hmm. I think he had been at Madison. And so I became more serious about Marxism, Marxist theory, and my favorite Marxism, though, was cultural Marxism, revisionist Marxism. We call it New Left Marxism. Marxism that was not economistic, but was oriented towards consciousness. Mm-hmm. Because we realized, we realized that that economic problems by themselves wouldn't radicalize the workers. Mm-hmm. That they needed to have a cultural transformation. So Gramsci was the best person, Hegelian Marxism. Mm-hmm. So, but then as I became less convinced, or let's just say totally convinced that there wouldn't be a revolution, and I also became quite alienated from the violent sectarianism of kind of the end stage of the anti-war movement in New Left. There was some Stalinist militant groups in Berkeley. There was the Weathermen. And I made a decision, some of my friends became Weathermen, that this was the wrong way to go. Then I became more open to quote-unquote bourgeois theory, and I took a class from Leo Lowenthal on Durkheim. And I wrote my class paper on Gramsci and Durkheim, which he thought was hysterical. Why would you do that? But I thought it made perfect sense, because both were very interested in consciousness and in collective representations. I took a Weber seminar with Bellah, and in the course of going in and talking to him, he suggested that the concerns I had, which were about voluntarism, which was a big issue in Marxist theory too.
Which is the free will in some sense.
Free will, autonomy. I mean, the problem with orthodox Marxism is the idea of economic determinism. But more sophisticated Marxists, like I was very interested in Jean-Paul Sartre and what was called existential Marxism, especially a long introduction to what became Critique of Dialectical Reason was published in English as Search for a Method. And it was all about the autonomy of the self. So I was interested in this as free will, or in some way related to culture, because the notion of the relative autonomy of culture was a phrase within the history of Marxism. Was the superstructure just a reflection of the base, or was it, did it have autonomy vis-a-vis the base? So Bellah, who himself had been a Marxist as a college student, he'd been in the John Reed Club at Harvard, said, I think you should read this book, which most people agree was Parsons' not just his first, but maybe his greatest book. And it was all about voluntarism. But it wasn't about voluntarism as free will, even though Parsons was a Kantian. It was about voluntarism as something that was nurtured by values, by the relative autonomy of values. And so that, everything, when I read that, a lot of things clicked. And I realized that I understood a lot about the problems I've been having with Marxism.
Yeah. And so you wrote a paper applying Parsons to Marx.
Yes.
Yeah. And you turned it in late, is what you said.
I took, like everything I've ever done since, it went on and on and on. Once you got involved in your own mind, things don't have end dates. And it is not a pleasurable process. So I felt very guilty to him, towards Bellah. Just like 10 years later, I would feel very guilty to Grant Barnes, who was my editor for my first book, Theoretical Logic, at UC Press. So I finally turned it in, I guess, probably over the summer. Or maybe it was maybe even the next semester. And then Bellah called me up at my home, which was absolutely shocking, why he would. So my girlfriend, or maybe my wife by then, Ruth Block, she answered the phone and she said, Jeff, Robert Bellah is on the phone.
Oh.
And I thought, shit.
What did I do?
Yeah, I thought, maybe, so I thought this might be good, it might be bad. So he said, Jeff, this is Robert Bellah. Like, it was Professor Bellah to me, I said, okay, so you're calling? He said, I just wanted to tell you that you wrote a great paper. This is a great piece of work, he said. And he said, I felt I should call you to tell you that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Instead of just giving written comments. And, my life changed. That was it. I said, of course, secretly I thought, maybe this is really good, but I wasn't sure, And I said, well, do you think I could write, do you think I could write a dissertation on this topic? He said, oh, yeah, you basically got it written already, just fill out a few this and that. And so I did, and that was a turning point. Maybe it led me off into some cul-de-sac for the next 8 years.
Yeah, you ended up writing theoretical logic from that paper, inspired by that paper, right?
Yeah, I really didn't change any of my ideas after that, because the heart of that work was, in a way, the relationship between a powerful cultural element and creating the capacity for autonomy.
Yeah. It's fascinating Robert Bellah, we don't typically call our students up on the phone and tell them they wrote good papers.
No.
And one of your students, Anne Kane, remembers you calling her up on the phone and telling her that she wrote a really great paper, which became a really important paper in cultural sociology about the concrete and analytic autonomy, the difference between concrete and analytic autonomy. And she tells a very similar story that...
Really, I don't honestly remember calling Anne, but I remember being blown away by the paper.
Yeah.
And because it was just a field exam.
Yeah.
And it was so brilliant. I was very excited, so I guess
you must have said that.
I did call her.
One of the things that I remember you said to me, or you said in I visited Yale in 2017 as a visiting scholar, and from time to time you would say, I'm blown away by this idea. And I would take that up in my head, like, oh, that's a really nice thing to say. Like, can I adopt that in my own teaching? And I wrote to a student that their comments, they were taking my theory class, that they had written something that blew me away. And years later, they wrote a reflection and remembered that I had told them that. And so I took that from you. It's the most powerful comment you can give someone. And you sort of have to be metered with it, but it was really influential.
I've always been very open to students' work. And I want to find things that are exciting. And nothing is ever more exciting than when somebody you've worked with develops a new idea. You just relate it to your work or your tradition, but is mature, original, sophisticated, powerful, and it's wonderful. It's very exciting. And you want them to know, to be heard. You want them to have the feeling that you understand, why it's so good, and of course, you want to encourage them.
Yeah.
Phil Smith has often criticized me by, you're mostly a motivator to students. You're not tough enough on it. And I'm sure that's true, but when students do mediocre work, I'm not interested in giving them bad grades. You have to. I'm interested in motivating people to do better work, and to giving people the reward when they do excellent work.
And it sticks in the mind too. I think I'd say that it was pretty effective, and it's a useful technique that I draw from.
Yeah.
And speaking of Phil Smith, Anne Kane, Ron Jacobs, your students at UCLA, your first set of graduate students, or your second set of graduate students, I should say, you're known for developing a cultural sociology with them. And you processed that first by teaching a class called Cultural Studies in 1984. So what do you remember do you remember anything at all about that class?
What I remember from that class in the first few years is that none of us, I didn't know what I was moving towards. There was no cultural sociology. There's no term. I introduced that term later, much later. And all I knew is that there was a new way of doing, I don't know, you say maybe social science, that it was part of what I understood later to be the cultural turn in the human sciences. So we were reading Geertz and Mary Douglas and Victor Turner. We were reading historians who did that, French and American, German. So the course in cultural studies was the first time I'd finished theoretical logic. Well, I'd actually finished it 4 years before it was coming out in 82 and 83. And I decided I'm going to, and I had been teaching theory. And I said, this is not what I want to do. I want to get away from this. Too much meta theory. I'm going to try to put a course together on this new way of doing social science, which I call cultural studies, I think. And it was extremely creative and exciting period, and that went on till, for years. And students, so we did this course, and I think some of the students were interested, and then I approached them after the course, some of them, not all of them, and said, would you like to, I'd like to start a discussion group or a study group about this cultural stuff. We'll continue reading, and it will be, you won't get any credit for it. It'll just be, we'll meet every few weeks in my house. And
in other people's houses, it turns out.
And then later we went around from one little apartment in LA to another. And at first we read this other stuff, but then in 85, 86, I was at the Princeton Institute, and I was able to write 2 papers that were the first cultural sociology papers that we would think today, 40 years later, oh yeah, that's cultural sociology, on Watergate and on the computer, which at the time seemed to me so wild and crazy and deviant that the one on the computer I just published in Japan. And the one on Watergate, I edited a book on Durkheim and culture and put it in there. Yeah. So, but then when I came back, the students still met, I think, occasionally when I was gone. But then in 86, I said, okay, look at these, And I think it made an impression, and people realized that there could be a form of sociology that was related to things in, semiotics, narrative theory, anthropology. And then even though I was the professor and the leader intellectually, these students were very exciting to work with, and they developed these ideas on their own, back and forth. There were students the older students would be leaders, and then they'd leave, and then the younger students, then they would become leaders. It was extremely important that they became a group.
And they called themselves the Culture Club.
And then they called themselves the Culture Club. We were a secret, in a kind of a secret society. Oh. I don't know whether the faculty even knew that there was a Culture Club, but it was great because then the classes I taught were not that important. Oh. What was important was the alternative, highly creative intellectual project that was developing outside of the curriculum.
Yeah, you were thinking with them as you were developing. This was fruitful for you.
Yeah, because we would read our papers back and forth. And then the students were real intellectuals, and they would be reading this and that, and they bring it back, and they would assume different roles in it.
You did. I mean, you did. You didn't forego your teaching despite this. In 1989, you actually won the UCLA Honors Division Gold Shield Award for teaching. Mm-hmm. And you also published a couple of years earlier a book called 20 Lectures, which is a long, actually really detailed hermeneutic reconstruction of the theories of the 20th century. And you're working on a book now with Ann Taylor at Mount Holyoke College called Cultural Sociology, The Lectures. And Anne had worked with you at Yale when she was a graduate student on this class, Cultural Sociology. I mean, why did you think that maybe turning your lectures into a book would be a good scholarly move? Why did that inspire that?
Well, I mean, I always I thought of teaching as a way to develop my own ideas. Mm. And so developing a new course was like, it was full-time, probably is for most people. And especially as I was moving into cultural sociology, this was a way to work out those. But the first book, 20 Lectures, was about theories. Mm-hmm. And it gave me a chance to develop beyond Parsons, in a sense, and to propose, to look at new ways of theorizing micro, macro, which was a topic I was interested in at the time. And it was in that book that I first introduced the term cultural sociology, when in a title for Geertz, I believe.
Yeah.
But I didn't think of it as, I thought of it a little bit sarcastically, like that it wasn't like what I later introduced as cultural sociology. Yeah. But it was very exciting. And then when I came to Yale, I also taught a course. I mean, I taught a course in cultural sociology for the first time. Mm-hmm. And the department said, we have too many small classes, we have to develop lectures. So I said, okay, I'll give a lecture course. And I knew it would be a chance to develop ideas, and also to move through a sequence of critique and exploration that would demonstrate the rationale for the strong program in cultural sociology,
which is your research program.
Yeah. And that would juxtapose it to, let's say, a production of culture, a sociology of culture, Pierre Bourdieu, Anne Swidler, Richard Peterson, others that were had more mechanistic, more instrumental, less richly cultural approaches. So this was, and I taught this course many times. Yeah. I would change the reading. Yeah. And then Anne, who was, I suppose, my last really excellent student. I mean, I still have a couple who have not finished, who are going to give Anne a run for her money. But she was a truly excellent student, and had also, it was at UCLA that I developed performance theory and cultural pragmatics. Yeah. That came out of teaching too. Yeah. I remember vividly. It was my last year I taught at UCLA, and Isaac Reed and others were with me at that time, and when I first thought of
Jason Maston. Yeah. It's fascinating to think that the first time you were exploring the idea of culture in a class, I guess we could say you didn't know what you were doing.
No, I didn't.
And then now you know exactly what you're doing.
Looking backward.
Yeah, looking backward.
Yeah, Jason was in that class, Lisa McCormick and Isaac Reed. And I was teaching Turner, and I suddenly realized you have to develop an independent idea of performance. And I even remember the book we were reading. Of course, we'd also read Robin Wagner-Pacific's The Moral Morality Play, which is a very, very creative book. So then at UCLA, Jason and I worked closely together on performance. At any rate, 2 or 3, 4 years ago, as Anne was a senior graduate student, I always thought, well, when I can't do really original research, and I'm old, of course I'm not old now, but when I'm really old, I'll put these lectures together as I had done, 40 years before. And then Anne said, I guess it was post-COVID, I don't have any support for this year. And I said, well, we could work on this book together.
Yeah. It's going to be great when it comes out.
Hope so.
Yeah. And looking back, we've only got a couple questions here. So if you look back over your career, you recently retired from Yale after almost more than 2 decades there. And we had a great retirement conference.
That was a high moment, yeah.
Yeah, it was good. Galen Watts and I putting together the essays from that conference as your Festschrift. And you had a really deep influence, not just as a theorist, but as a mentor. And one of your students, Ron Jacobs, a member of that culture club, says that you have an Alexander style of mentoring. Do you think that you have an Alexander style of mentoring?
Well, I don't think a person has the ability to look at themselves from the outside. So I have no idea.
Okay.
I only know that one of the greatest satisfactions of my life has been developing close intellectual and personal relations with brilliant students. Not just brilliant, all doctoral students, but, seeing some of them and being involved in really developing. And, the mixture of criticism and faith, Ron said I could be very harsh, but that I could also be very supportive.
Right.
I don't remember the harsh part, but, I when I find ideas or articulations that I don't like, I feel very disappointed and sometimes almost angry. And so maybe some of that came out with, but I think that I had the ability to push students to do better. With
motivation and judicious use of the term blown away from time to time.
Could be.
Yeah. This is our last question, Jeff. You said in an interview years back that teaching can sometimes feel alienating, but it can also be a transcendental intellectual experience. And then you said, sometimes I've struggled to stay in touch with the pleasure of teaching, but you'd still wager that few things are more intrinsically satisfying than giving a lecture to receptive university students and to engage with spirited discussion afterwards. So our last question is, looking back over 60 years, with a really long and wonderful career, what tips would you give us to stay in touch with the pleasure of teaching?
I don't think, tips, don't teach the same course too many times. To make yourself either I would always put in 1 or 2 new books every year, and then I would try to I would develop new courses because I personally wanted to explore a new field. So that's, I don't know if you can do that at all the universities, but at more privileged places. And I think, so your teaching has to be part of your personal intellectual exploration. But I don't think there's anything more exciting than, last night I gave a lecture here at Kenyon. On I knew I was going to, I told you months ago I would do a lecture, Theory of Trump. And so I spent the 2 months of winter where I live in the winter in Los Angeles working on this, thinking I'm going to do this. And, it wasn't very all the time pleasant, thinking about this dark force in America. But when I gave the lecture, it was extremely exciting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I felt it was like a transcendental experience of being fused with an audience.
Mm-hmm.
I could see they were listening. Things were quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in, thinking, speaking. They were listening. And then the discussion, I loved discussion afterward. It could have gone on for hours.
You had a ton of students just coming up to you at the end of the lecture and asking you questions.
Yeah, that was very exciting.
Well, Jeff, thanks for coming on the podcast today, and thanks for coming back to Kenyon College.
Look forward to coming back again someday. Thank you for inviting me.
That's great. See you next time, everyone. And thanks for listening to the Kenyon College Profcast.